Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our check-in and chat webinar. It's great to have you with us. My name's Caitlin McMorrow. I'm usually Vision Australia's NDIS operations lead, but I'll be your host this afternoon. Before we go any further, I would just like to acknowledge all the traditional owners of the various lands that we're meeting on today and to pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I also want to let you know that this session will be recorded, and if you go to www.visionaustralia.org/check-in and chat, you'll be able to find the recording there in a few days' time. You can also use that page to check out previous sessions that we've held and to have a look at the topics for upcoming webinars. As I mentioned, my name's Caitlin, and joining us today as our expert guest speaker, we have Melly Tantalos. Melly is a provisional psychologist, and she's highly experienced at teaching study skills and strategies to students. Welcome along, Melly. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
So we're talking today about studying like a pro, and I guess whether you're a university student, a school student, or even if you're a parent who's assisting your child with study, we'll have some tips to help you with things like managing time, setting goals, and looking after your mental well-being. If you'd like to ask a question during the session, you can type it into the chat section of the Zoom window that you're watching this webinar in. For screen reader users who are logged in on a PC, you can press Alt-H to open the chat feature and then type your question into the box and press enter. We'd just ask you guys to try and keep your questions general if you can, and just don't share personal information about yourself that you might not want other people to see. And we'll try to get through as many of your questions as we can in the time we have available. But let's kick off now. I thought, Melly, we might start talking a little bit about time management, because managing our time effectively is one of the key challenges we all have when it comes to study. And I guess how we spend our time has changed a bit while we've all been in lockdown. So for a lot of people, it's been a bit hard to figure out the new normal. Just wondering if you could talk a little bit, how important is it for people to have a daily or a weekly routine? And can you talk about what that might look like for students?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something we've definitely talked about a lot lately, both on check-in and chat, but just generally in conversations now that COVID-19 has sort of made a lot of people work and study from home. So routine is even more important now than it's ever been before. There are a number of benefits to having a regular routine. It reduces stress because you know what's coming up in your week. There's a bit more predictability, and that makes you a little less anxious. You kind of can start to see where you're going to fit everything in and what you've got going on. It also can reduce the chance of developing insomnia. And we are going to talk about sleep a little bit later, because sleep is something really important, and having a sleep routine is super important for your mental health as well. Parents will be happy to know that a solid family routine actually can reduce impulsiveness in children and make them a little less defiant at times. So kids really do need routine as well, and it's really good to have a family routine established at home. It also makes sure that we have balance in our week. If we've got a routine where we've scheduled in a little bit of fun and a little bit of relaxation, that ensures that we're not just working 24/7, because we know if we're doing that, we're going to burn out and it's not going to be much fun. And if we always know that we have something fun coming up, that's going to keep us going throughout our workday as well. In terms of what that looks like for students, routine is really the things that you're doing before school or before you go off to study, and the things that you do in the afternoon, maybe after school or after university. And in particular, the key thing here is finding time to fit in all of the study, but all of the fun things as well. So routine allows you to fit everything in really neatly.
Excellent. And some great news for parents out there, I guess, who are all trying to wrangle their families into some kind of routine. There you go, guys. You've got the official word on it now. It's definitely worth it.
That's it.
Do you have any tips on how students can put together a schedule or sort of document their routine a bit to help manage their time?
Yeah, absolutely. So I recommend using what I call a vertical planner. So what that actually looks like is it's got your whole week displayed on one page, And the way it's set out is that all the days of the week are written across the top and all the times are written down the side. So you end up with 7 columns, each column representing one day of your week. And I recommend that layout, as I said, because you can see your whole week at once. And as you start filling it in, you can start to see where the gaps are too. So in terms of how you should actually fill this in, first thing, obviously, you got to put the compulsory stuff in there. So if you know you have to be at school, you want to be putting that in there first. That's going to block out a huge chunk of your time. So you'll just block that in. But the mistake that students often make is the next thing they do is they go ahead and they straight away, they'll put their study in their routine. And I particularly see this with really conscientious year 11 and 12 students who think, you know, this year's going to be different. I'm going to do so much study. I'm going to do really well. And they chuck in all of this study in all of the gaps in their routine. In their weekly schedule. And pretty soon, after a couple of days trying to follow this, they're so incredibly bored and demotivated that they just throw the routine or the schedule away and they don't follow it anymore. So one of my top tips is to actually schedule in the fun first. So if you've got something that you love doing that you're looking forward to in your week, put that in your planner, put that in your schedule before you put in any homework. After that, have a look at your week and then you'll start to notice the gaps about where you could maybe study. So let's say on a Monday afternoon, you don't have anything written down except that you're going to watch Netflix after dinner. So you know now you've got a free block between the time that you finish school to the time that you have dinner. So that's where you'll just chuck in a study block. Another tip for schedules is don't worry if you can't stick to it. It is difficult and we're all human and there's going to be days where you really don't want to do that study that you had planned. And there's going to be other days where you're actually really motivated and you're going to do more than you had planned. So just be flexible with it. In terms of how to actually make it, you can be as creative as you like. If you have some site, you might like to use a whiteboard. You might like to draw it out on paper. Or you might like to use a digital version of a planner. So you could use Excel to create those columns. Maybe you've got something in your Braille note taker that you can use. Anything really that you think is going to be useful that's going to display your week like that. Google and Outlook work really well too.
Excellent. And there's some fantastic calendar apps and things for iPads and iPhones and stuff like that, isn't there, that people can use?
Yeah,
I know Fantastical is quite a good accessible one, which if you're a vision impaired person can display things in quite a nice format so you can see everything that you've got coming up. I guess the other thing with studying and time management is, like, if we have a deadline to work to, like a exam or an assignment that's due, it's really easy to get overwhelmed, isn't it, and kind of leave everything till the last minute because you just don't know where to start with any of it. How do we kind of plan and organize ourselves to avoid that?
Yeah, that's such a common problem. A lot of students tell me that they either hand up their assignments late because they're feeling so overwhelmed they couldn't get it done on time, or they don't hand it off at all, which is obviously not a great thing. So we do need a strategy to get over this overwhelm. My 2 tips are, number 1, you've got this giant task in front of you. That's really scary and overwhelming. So what you want to do is break it down into tiny little chunks and make them as small as you need to make them seem manageable. So let's say you have an essay that you have to write. Thinking, oh my gosh, I have to write this 1,000-word essay. That sounds a little bit scary, but break it down into its little pieces. Before you even start writing, you're probably going to have to do a little bit of research. So you might set aside one item on your list of things that you have to do. One little chunk is, I'm going to go to the library and I'm going to pick up a book about what I'm learning about, or I'm going to set aside some time to surf the web and find some sources. Another little chunk might be, I'm going to make some dot points on that source that I read. Another little chunk might be, I'm going to write the first paragraph or just draft the first paragraph of the essay. So you're really breaking it down. And if you're still overwhelmed, just make those pieces even tinier. The next thing you'll do once you've got all of those little chunks is you would have probably already put them into a list. And again, you can use technology to do this. I've been using the Microsoft To Do app, which allows you to create multiple different lists. And you can also add deadlines to each of the items on the list, which can be really handy. What I tend to do is I either use that or I write down my list on paper, and then I take out that planner that I've just created in the last step that we talked about, and I have a look at which homework blocks I have free. And then all you really want to do is take a few things from your list and chuck them in each homework block based on how long you think they'll probably take. It's probably a good idea to kind of guesstimate how long you think each thing will take beforehand, so you know how many days you're going to need to set aside to get this done. Once you have an idea of how many days, then you really want to count backwards from the deadline from when it's due, and you want to be slotting those little tasks into your homework blocks in the week, prior, so in the days prior to that deadline. So hopefully you're chipping away at it bit by bit, and by the time you get to the deadline, it's basically done.
That sounds like a much better strategy than pulling an all-nighter the day before, which I think every uni student has done at some point.
Oh
in
yeah.
their
Look, I
study
won't lie.
career.
I've done it too. But the reality is, Caitlin, we probably still end up spending almost the same amount of time working on it, but it's just in one giant chunk, and our brains aren't working as well. So we may as well break it down and do it bit by bit.
That's it, yeah. You mentioned keeping things in a list as part of that strategy. Do you then kind of tick things off that list to make you feel, because often that can make you feel motivated, can't it, that you're getting stuff
Yeah.
done?
Absolutely. That's such a huge reinforcer. Every time you cross something off, you get such a good feeling and you just want to cross the next thing off. So I definitely recommend paper lists if you can, because that feeling of crossing it off is so great.
Yeah. And I know as a vision impaired person, I do that even with the electronic list. I'll put little stars next to the things I've done already, and has kind of a similar
Yeah,
effect to seeing it all there visually.
absolutely. Or even just deleting that little item off of the list must feel
Yeah,
so good too. Yeah.
definitely. I guess the other thing that we tend to think of too when we think about time management and study is procrastination, with all the
Mhm.
distractions of social media and streaming services and gaming and all the other stuff that we have going on. It's easier to kind of lose track of it all and procrastinate while we're studying. Do you have any suggestions for managing that?
Yeah, absolutely. Procrastination is a huge issue for a lot of people, not just students, but definitely when you're studying, particularly because everything is done, digitally now. It's really hard not to just open Facebook while you're working on something else. And so the tip that I've got for everyone is self-control. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Melly, I have no self-control. That's why this is an
I
issue for
wasn't
me.
going to
That's why
say
I'm
it.
procrastinating. But actually, self-control is an app that you can get. You can download it on your Apple products. So if you have a MacBook or if you have an iPhone, it's a good one for that. If you have an Android or Windows phone, you can use a different app. I'm currently using Stay Focused. And what this app does is you can tell it to block certain apps or websites at certain times or for certain time intervals. So let's say you're sitting at your desk and you're like, I really just need to get through, the next few equations in my maths book. And I reckon it's probably going to take me around half an hour. So I'm just going to block Facebook for half an hour. So I'm not tempted to jump on there. So I can just stay focused for a little while. And I'm finding it really interesting because the Stay Focused app also monitors all of your usage, your screen time, and your usage of different apps, which is good data for me to know and see how long I'm wasting on my phone each day. But it also lets me block certain notifications at certain times. So I don't like to check emails in the evenings if I can avoid it. So I've now turned off notifications in the evenings for those.
Ah, excellent. That sounds like a great one to check out. Yeah, and um, definitely a great strategy there. You touched on this a little bit earlier, when you were talking about still doing things that are fun. I guess even when we're working hard, that's still really important, isn't it? So I'm just wondering what some of your tips are around balancing study with actually doing stuff that we enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. Balance is really key, and it's hard to achieve. But we definitely want to schedule in fun things in our week, because as I was saying, if we don't, we're going to get burnt out pretty quickly, and we're going to lose that energy that we have to do those more mundane tasks. And we all know as well that, you know, when we're not doing anything that makes us happy, we're a lot less productive. You know, if you're not happy, you're not productive. I'm sure if you've had a bad day at work, you've never come home and been that novel that I started, you know, you just don't have the energy for it if you've had a bad day. So we want to make sure we're always scheduling things into our week that are going to make sure we do have a good day, so that we can be productive. But one extra little tip that I'll give to parents is that parents often like to hold their children accountable to their study time. But one thing that parents can really do that can be really helpful is if you've made a schedule with your child together, so you know what their week looks like, you can also hold them accountable to their leisure time. So if you notice that they've been working really, really hard for, like, you know, a decent amount of time, maybe all night or all week, they don't seem to have taken a break at all and they don't look too happy, maybe it's time to start holding them accountable to their leisure time too. So to say, hey, don't you think maybe it's time to take a break? And that can be really helpful as well.
Yeah, that's great. If you've just logged into the webinar, welcome along. Thanks for joining us. We're speaking today with Melly Tantalos, who's a provisional psychologist, and she's had a lot of experience in advising students about study strategies. And today we're talking about studying like a pro. And even if you're not studying at the moment, I think we're hearing some great tips that can apply to general work life and lots of other things as well, which is great. If you would like to ask a question during this session, you can type it into the chat section of the Zoom that you're watching this webinar in, and we'll pause for a bit and answer some of your questions shortly. The other thing, Melly, I guess that we often think about in terms of study is goal setting, because one of the important things to keep us on track is knowing what we're working towards. Why is it so important to have a goal, and how do we go about deciding on one?
Yeah, so one of the biggest problems that I see in students in schools and in people in general, really, and one of the reasons why I'm asked to speak to students is because they seem to be lacking motivation. And I'll often get told, hey, can you just go talk to the students? Can you pump them up a little bit? Can you motivate them? And I always laugh a little bit at this, because motivation is not just an emotion. You can't just walk up to someone and yell at them a little bit and, you know, jump around a little bit and get them pumped up and then expect that they're going to go, you know, study for hours on end. Motivation can be thought of as a driving energy. It's driving us towards a destination. So it's crucial then that we have a destination if we want to be motivated. And the destination is a goal. You've got to have a goal if you want to have motivation. So this is the number one thing that I'll always tell students when I see them lacking motivation is, what's your goal? Now, your goal, in terms of how do you come about in deciding at a goal, no one can tell you what your goal is. It's going to be entirely personal. It's got to be something that really you care about and you've attached a lot of meaning to, something that inspires you, right? So it's not something that your parents tell you you should do, or that your peers tell you you should do, or even your teacher. It's got to come from within. In terms of figuring out what it might be, I always suggest that people do a little bit of reflective journaling. So just sit down and write it all out, or even talk it all out with someone if you're more of, if you can get your ideas out by talking. So think about your values. Ask, why am I doing this? What do I care about? Where do I want to end up? Whatever your goal, when you're actually figuring it out and really tailoring it, you're refining it, I've got 3 tips for you. So the first one, as I said, was make sure it is really important and rewarding for you. But second, make sure it's specific. Try to actually have a really specific goal. So instead of just saying, I want to get better at speaking French, you might say, I want to be able to comfortably have a 10-minute conversation in French by November. See, now that's a lot more specific. And so now you have some idea of how you're going to achieve it. You're going to have to think about what you actually have to do to get there. Whereas when it's more generic, it's harder to know, how do I actually arrive at that goal? And so as soon as you hit a roadblock, you kind of lose the motivation. So being specific is really important. And again, this goes for anyone, not just people at school. You know, your goal, you might say, I want to learn how to use my iPad. But try to be more specific. What is it that you want to learn, and why? Why is it important to you? So maybe you want to say instead, I want to learn to use the video call features on my iPad so I can call my grandchildren. That's a lot more specific, and that's going to keep you motivated. The third thing about goals is that you want to make sure that they are written down somewhere. Use that specific language and have it written out, and put it somewhere where you can reinforce it regularly as well.
Excellent. And I guess that point around reinforcing goals kind of leads me on to the next question, which is, once we've figured out what our goal is going to be, how do we make sure that we're on track to achieve it?
Yeah, great question. So sometimes actually creating a goal can be a little bit overwhelming, and it is hard to stay on track to achieve it. So, you know, if you're at school, maybe your goal is that you need to get a really high ATAR so you can get into a course that you really care about, so you can get a job that you really care about. And so that can be quite overwhelming, and it's a little bit ambiguous. How do I actually get there? So in terms of making sure that you're on track to achieve your goal, what you want to do is then break your big goal down into smaller short-term goals. You want to make sure they're small, they're achievable, and you want to have a good understanding of how you can achieve them. So let's say your big goal is to get an ATAR score of 82.5 so you can get accepted into a Bachelor of Arts Creative Writing at UCID next year, so you can become an author and write amazing stories. So your short-term goal might be, I want to get 85% for English this semester, which is an A on your report card. Then you've got to ask, okay, well, how do I actually do that? So this is where you might like to use an assessment planner. So pretty much the way that the assessment planner works is you just write down all of your assessments that you're going to have for English that semester. And then you write down how much they're weighted. So what are they worth? Is this assignment worth 50% of your grade, or less, or more? Then write down your specific goal that you have in mind for each assessment. So if you want 85% overall, you probably want to aim for about 85% for each of your assignments, or maybe even more. So you write that down. The next and crucial step is write down how you're going to achieve that goal. So find out. Go talk to your teacher, say, hey, Mrs. English teacher, how do I get 85% on this assessment? And write down everything they say. Now you've got even smaller goals, which are a lot more achievable. So she might say, make sure you've got really good notes on the novel that we're currently reading in class. Make sure you do a first draft, and make sure that I proofread it before you hand up the good copy. As you do each of these small goals, as we said before, cross them off, tick them off. And once you finish that assessment, track your progress. What did you end up getting? Did you get the 85% you hoped for? If you did, awesome, write that down. And now you know how you're tracking towards your overall goal of 85%. How do you make an assessment planner? You can use whatever you like. I used to just write it down on paper, or I'd use a table in Microsoft Word. Sometimes Microsoft Excel works way better for this as well, and it tallies up all your scores automatically if you add some formulas in there. So whatever works for you, but make sure you've got an assessment plan, and make sure you're tracking your progress and ticking off those small goals as you go.
Okay, so it's almost a little bit like the routine thing, or planning the deadline that we talked about earlier, isn't it? You kind of break it down into smaller components. It's kind of the key
Yeah.
thing. Yeah.
Absolutely. Each of those things that your teacher told you in that conversation is going to go on your list, and then you're going to go ahead and schedule it into your week once again.
And if you're a fairly non-visual person for whom tables don't kind of come as a natural way to absorb things, would it necessarily matter, do you think, what format you keep that list or that planner in?
No, not at all. Whatever works for you and whatever makes sense to you. The key thing here is that you're tracking your progress and that you're ticking off those small goals as you go along.
Excellent. You talked a bit about motivation before, and I just wanted to dig into that a little bit more in terms of staying motivated. Because often when we've got a goal, we start out with all these good intentions and we're really motivated to achieve it. What strategies can we help us use to help us kind of keep that motivation level up, though, in terms of achieving our study goals?
Yeah, great. So we talked about two types of goals, I guess, like that big goal and then those smaller goals. So you might use different strategies for each of them. In terms of the big goal, like I alluded to earlier, you want to make sure that it's either written down or it's accessible in some way such that it's going to be reinforced constantly. So you're going to keep seeing it pop up all the time. So for some people, that might mean writing it down in really large font like I did when I was in year 12 and sticking it to the back of your desk. So every time you sit down to study, you see it there and you know, this is why I'm sitting here, because I want to achieve that goal. I know other people who had photos or vision boards, something visual for them, but it doesn't have to just be visual. We talked, Caitlin, about having like braille flashcards and things like that, something that you could have sitting on your desk that every time you sit down, you know, you feel it there.
Yeah.
Whatever works for you, really. Even calendar notifications, I think we were brainstorming the other day. You could have a little pop-up notification at the start of each day or each week, and it just reminds you, this is why you're here, this is why you're doing this. In terms of those smaller goals, though, you want to reward yourself when you tick off those little small goals that are helping you work towards your big goal. So maybe when you get 85% on that English assignment, awesome, reward yourself by buying a new book or a new audio book. And when you reach your goal of getting 85% for that whole semester, maybe get dinner with your family to celebrate. Do things that get you excited about your goal and make you feel great about working towards it.
A new book would definitely be a motivator for me. I could quite happily just buy books forever.
Awesome.
My bank account wouldn't like it all. Can we talk about what happens then if we don't reach a particular goal that we've set out to achieve? Because often that can kind of make us feel a bit disappointed or start to doubt our capability if we haven't done as well in something as we'd like. If we have to rethink a goal, how do we make sure that we approach it with the right mindset? Like, is it better to always aim high when we're thinking about goals, or should we set goals that we know we can easily achieve? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I've definitely heard friends say, you know, I'm just going to aim low because then if I achieve lower, then I won't be disappointed. But unfortunately, if we aim low, we do tend to achieve a lower outcome, you know. So we're actually setting ourselves up for failure when we do that. So if I have to give some advice, I would say a lot of people, when they don't achieve their goal, they get really disheartened and they take it personally, right? And, you know, as we talked about as well, Caitlin, sometimes if you've got, you know, if you're a person with a vision impairment, you might actually blame it on that as well. You might say, oh, well, I can't do it because, you know, I'm disadvantaged, and you'll blame it on something about yourself, right?
Yeah.
And I see a lot of students do this. They say, oh, it's just because I'm not smart enough. You know, maybe you didn't get 85% on that English essay and you thought you wanted to be an author, but now you're questioning everything. You're like, maybe I'm really bad at English. Now, the thing that we've learned from research that we've done is that the people that do really well at achieving their goals are not smarter or more capable than other students. What sets them apart is they have the right mindset, and they have what we call a growth mindset. Now, there's two types of mindsets that we talk about. There's a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. So I'll use that English example again to explain them. Let's say two students get the same score. They both got their English essay back and they got 60%. Now, they passed, but they're a little disappointed because they were hoping for a higher score. The student that has a fixed mindset is going to say, oh, maybe I'm not so good at English after all, and maybe they'll just give up on trying. The person with the growth mindset, what they'll say instead is they'll say, I wonder where I lost marks. What could I include in my essay next time to get more marks? How could I change my approach? And the key difference here is that they're not taking it personally. They're not saying, oh, I'm just bad at English. They're saying, oh, it must have been something about my approach, about my process that wasn't quite right. And if I adjust the process, I'm going to get a different outcome. So that's called the growth mindset. So my advice then, of course, is don't take it personally. Think about your process. Keep aiming high. Don't aim any lower, aim high, and go back to your teacher and say, hey, teacher, I didn't get the score I wanted. What do I have to do next time to get that score? And you'll be more likely to then achieve that higher goal, because now you know what you have to do to get there, versus the student who decides to aim lower, doesn't change their process, and then of course gets the exact same result.
Yeah, that's it's a really interesting way to think about it, isn't it? It's not always about you. Sometimes it's the process. It's not you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. Hmm. We're speaking with Melly Tantalos today about studying like a pro. If you've just joined us, welcome along. And if you did join us a bit late and you've missed any of the session, you will be able to catch up on it again later. Just a reminder that if you would like to ask a question during the session, you can type it into the chat section of the Zoom window that you're watching this webinar in, and we'll aim to get to as many questions as we can before the end. Let's talk a little bit about memory and retaining information, because that often feels like one of the main pressure points as well when we're studying. We often kind of, it feels like a challenge sometimes to absorb and retain all the information that we need. Are there things we can do to optimize our study environment to give ourselves the best chance of remembering information?
Yes, absolutely. And you're right. Memory is an important component of study and in life in general. And a lot of people often, will comment, my parents now as they're getting older, they're always like, oh, my memory's going. I have a terrible memory. But I think actually most of us just don't understand how our memory works. And so we don't know how to use it to our advantage. So a very brief introduction to memory, if we had to think of it as a kind of flow chart. Let's imagine there's some information, it's out in the world. The first thing we need to do to learn it is to actually pay attention to it. Once we're paying attention to it, it goes into our short-term memory, and that's where we manipulate it and work with it and think about it. After that, we can store it or encode it in our long-term memory. And that's in there for storage for later usage, like maybe on a test or whenever it becomes relevant. When we take it out of that long-term storage, that's called retrieval. So we retrieve it from that long-term storage. So like I said, the first step to remembering anything, therefore, is to pay attention to it. And we can indeed optimize our environment. So we are paying maximum attention, which means our short-term memory can work better and do its job so we can get our study done. So in terms of practical strategies, we can think of our environment in terms of both an external environment, so that's things that are happening around us, and an internal environment, so what's going on within us, within our body, within our mind. So to optimize your external environment, number one, sit at your desk when you're studying. Preferably do this in a room that's actually dedicated to study, and don't do it on your bed or on the floor. I don't know if you've ever had this.
I always did that. Yeah.
You do? Do you ever have this habit, perhaps, Caitlin, where you're reading something and you find yourself just nodding off, like if you're reading on the couch or in bed?
Yeah, particularly if I'm reading with a screen reader, because the voice is a bit robotic, and yeah, sometimes your attention does kind of tend to wander and you realize you've missed a page.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
definitely
it.
happens.
And then you have to scroll back and you have to read it all again.
That's it. Yeah.
That's it. And that happens because our bodies and our minds naturally associate certain areas with certain activities. So when you're in bed or on the couch, your brain is thinking, this is relaxation, like switch off time. We don't need to pay attention now. Whereas when you're at your desk, you're thinking, this is study mode. Another thing, another phenomenon is that we have this thing called context-dependent memory. So we tend to remember things that we've learned in the past when we're in the same context again. So to explain that, if I am studying for my exam while sitting at my desk, in a seated position at a desk. When I'm in the real exam, the context is similar. I'm again sitting at a desk. And we actually make those associations. So I'm more likely to remember the content that I learned at my desk when I'm sitting at a desk again. So that's one tip. Secondly, clean your study area. You want to get rid of anything that could distract you. Even it could be the smallest thing, could be the label on your drink bottle, and you just start habitually peeling it off. Get rid of
fidget spinner
everything.
you bought a while ago that distracts you.
That's it. Also, think about the noise levels in the room that you're in. Now, it really depends what kind of work that you're working on, what my advice would be around noise. So if you're doing something that has a high cognitive demand, like trying to memorize content for an exam, you probably want to avoid having music or any other noise in the background except for white noise. White noise can help you concentrate. So that's like the gentle hum of your heater, or maybe like some rain sounds or something like that. When you're just working on another activity that doesn't require so much focus, then it's okay to have music on and things like that if that keeps you motivated. I will also give a tip to say, put your phone in another room. There's actually a fair bit of evidence to suggest that even just having your phone in the same room as you can distract you, even if it's on silent, switched off, in your bag, whatever. So get it away from you as far away as possible, because every time you get interrupted, some research has suggested you can lose up to 25 minutes of time. And what they mean by that is it's going to take you, after an interruption, it could take you up to 25 minutes to refocus yourself back on what you were just doing. So if you think about that, really, wow, what a waste of time it would be to even just check your phone really quickly, or just to check Facebook really quickly. You're losing a lot of time and you're interrupting your flow. So we haven't talked about internal environments, so I have to get to that. There's some good research to suggest that doing a bit of physical activity before you sit down to study can actually help you pay attention. So yeah, definitely chuck on your favorite Beyonce song, dance around your room a little bit before you sit down at the desk. That's going to help you focus as well.
Warm up dance. Love it.
Yeah, whatever music you're into, doesn't have to be Beyonce, of course. That wasn't part of the research. Second, don't try to multitask. A lot of young people in particular think that they're really good at multitasking, and the truth is we're not. Our brains have not evolved so quickly that we're better at multitasking than our parents. What we are good at is toggling, so switching between tasks really quickly. We are really good at that, but we don't necessarily do any of those tasks that well. And we certainly don't enter a state of flow where we're really focused and really getting a lot done and being really productive. So just don't multitask. If you're not working on your, French homework, close the French book, put it away, just focus on the math homework that you're doing right now, and close your other tabs that aren't relevant either. And my last tip in terms of your internal environment relates to your attention span. So our attention spans sit roughly at about 50 minutes. So it's lucky that this webinar is about an hour long because we generally can't focus for too much longer after 50 minutes. So my tip there is organize your study or your work, whatever you're doing, into 1 hour blocks. Have 50 minutes of work and a 10-minute break every time. And when you take that break, try to get up and move around, because like we said, doing that physical activity is going to help you focus better, and it's going to kind of reset your attention span for another 50 minutes.
Yeah, some great tips there, and a whole heap of information. Just coming back to the external environment, just because I'm curious. You mentioned listening to music being okay for some tasks. Does it matter what kind of music you listen to? Is there any research on whether certain types work better, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't really read thoroughly through the research. Obviously, we know that classical music is often recommended. I think generally I would say pick something that's going to motivate you and pick something that isn't going to distract you. So I tend to listen to really familiar music that I've listened to 1,000 times already when I'm studying, because it helps me focus. I love the music. That's why I've listened to it so much, but I don't get distracted by new lyrics or new sounds that I'm not familiar with.
Yeah.
So those would be my tips, but I will admit I haven't read too thoroughly through that type of research.
It's interesting though, because I tend to listen to instrumental music because I get distracted by lyrics.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if I'm studying, often pick something instrumental so I'm not distracted by that. So yeah,
Yeah,
interesting.
great tip.
Um, Coming back to memory again, are there particular tips or tricks that we can use to make things easier to remember? Because that's often what we try to do, isn't it? Make things a bit easier so that we retain them better.
Yeah, absolutely. There are some really cool memory tricks out there you can use to help you store information in your long-term memory. So remember how we were saying it goes into your long-term memory. So that's what these kind of memory tricks are aimed to do, to store it there. And they're called mnemonics, which is spelled Onic, mnemonic. Confusing word, but there's a few reasons why information is hard to remember, and mnemonics try to address that. So information is usually hard to remember because it's impersonal. It's not about you, so you can't relate to it, or why would you care? It's delivered in a way that only appeals to one sensory channel. So often at school, we're either getting audio information or visual information, and it's one or the other or both, but it doesn't address anything else. You know, we also have like smell and taste and touch as well that maybe doesn't get addressed as much at school. Information is also hard to remember because it's usually delivered in a passive way. So someone's just talking at you and you're not really doing anything with the information. You're just listening to it passively.
Yeah.
And also it's hard to remember because it doesn't appeal to our emotions. So there's no reaction that we get from it. There's nothing memorable about it, really. So in order to make something memorable, we kind of have to do the opposite of all of those things. We have to make the information personal, sensory, so it appeals to as many of our senses as possible. We have to make it interactive, and ideally we want to make it emotional in some way. We want to get a reaction. So it's got to be funny or weird or awkward. It's just got to give us some kind of reaction. So mnemonics, like I said, they utilize these 4 ingredients to make things memorable. And I'd love to teach you one mnemonic today, which incorporates these key ingredients. It's called the memory palace. So the memory palace is a metaphor for a place that you're really familiar with that you can easily imagine in your head. So for this memory palace, I want everyone to imagine their own house. So I'm going to walk you through your own house, and in each different part of the house, you're going to create a mental image that is personal, sensory, interactive, and emotional. And by doing this, we're going to memorize a list of things. So I'm going to place each thing in a different part of the house. Now I'm going to tell you in advance what we're memorizing. We're going to memorize the planets in order. And we're not going to do all of them because we won't have time, but just to give you an idea of how this goes. So we're going to attach each planet to an imaginary item in your house. I'm going to interact with it in this story. And some of you might like to close your eyes for this exercise as well, if that helps you visualize things. Okay. Imagine you're standing outside your house. It is freezing cold and bucketing down with rain. You have never experienced such cold in your life. You rush up to the front door, very keen to get inside. And as you rush up, you check quickly an old mercury thermometer, which you bought at a vintage secondhand shop that you've got hanging up next to your door. And as you check this mercury thermometer, you cannot believe what it says. It says minus 30 degrees. How is that even possible? It's never that cold in Australia. But the mercury doesn't lie. You hurry inside, close the door, and thankfully it's a lot warmer inside. You go straight to your bathroom to towel down because you're soaking wet from the rain. And as you're getting dressed, you notice that you missed a spot while shaving earlier. So you grab your Venus Gillette razor. You always buy Venus with the 5 blades because you're a bit clumsy. You don't want to cut yourself. And you begin shaving with your Venus 5 blades, but you nick yourself. Ow! So much for those fancy 5 blades. I think you're going to have to file a complaint with those Venus manufacturers later. You leave the bathroom and you go to your bedroom to put on some fresh pajamas. And as you do, you spot your map of the earth on the wall. You've got pins in it in all of the places. You've got friends all over the world. You start to think about all the places you've been in the past, all the sights and smells that you've experienced on this wonderful earth. And you've got a pin on there too to mark a destination you can't wait to get to after COVID-19 restrictions are lifted. What's that destination for you? Now you've got your pajamas on, you're feeling a little more cozy, but after dealing with the cold outside and then nicking yourself with the razor, all you really want right now is some junk food. So you go to your kitchen and you go to find your secret stash of Mars bars. Yes, there's still a few left. You go ahead and rip open one of the Mars bars. Yum, gooey caramel in a Cadbury case. You feel it melt in your mouth and you instantly feel a little better. Mars may not be the best chocolate bar in the world, but it's exactly what you needed right now. Okay, so we only did a few of the planets there, but let's see if we can remember everything just to prove that this technique works. So when you were outside of your house, Caitlin, and you ran up to the door, what did you check before you went in?
Oh, I checked the thermometer because it was cold. So that was mercury.
That's it. It was a mercury thermometer. Awesome. And then you went to the bathroom, and what did we use to shave ourselves?
I used the Venus razor, the 5-blade one.
Venus, for the planet Venus. Great.
That's it. Yep.
Then we went to your room, and what was on the wall?
That would be my map of planet Earth with all the pins in it.
Exactly. And then we went over to the kitchen, and what did we eat?
A Mars bar.
A Mars bar. Awesome. Yep. So that was just a bit of fun.
Hey, I think I passed you guys.
You definitely passed. With flying colours. So you can definitely use this technique to remember a list of things or a group of concepts, particularly if you have to remember them in chronological order. And if you always go through the same order in your memory palace, you can attach different objects to different things in the house, and then you can imaginarily walk through it and remember them. And as you would have noticed, we made this personal, we made you interact with the objects, and that made it more memorable as well. And we try to include a few emotions in there too, because we know that those are memorable as well.
That's a really great strategy. And just as well, I was paying attention to the story, because that's the first bit of remembering things, isn't it? Just making sure that you're paying attention.
Good thing you are.
We've got a few minutes left, and I'd like us to talk a little bit about well-being, because obviously studying can be stressful, particularly when it gets near to exam time, and often there's a bit of anxiety associated with that. Is stress always a bad thing, and how can we manage it?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of my favorite quotes about stress is, stress causes some people to break and others to break records. And I think straight away that shows you that stress isn't always bad, and there's different types of stress. So we can actually think of 2 types of stress. The stress that might cause a person to break is distress. So that's when you're feeling quite anxious and worried because you don't think that you have the coping skills or the resources that you need to deal with the challenge ahead of you. On the other hand, the type of stress that causes people to break records is called eustress. And this is a good kind of stress. This occurs when you feel confident, maybe even excited about the challenge ahead, because you know you've got the resources you need to overcome it. Yeah, it's still going to be hard, but you can do it. You know you can do it. So ideally, when we've got stress in our lives and we've got those challenges, we want to reframe the problem or the situation so that we can move from distress to eustress. So we need to figure out, what are the actions that I need to take to get the resources that I need to overcome the problem, to get the job done. so that you can move from an overwhelming challenge to a motivating challenge. So the tip that I have for people, number one, write down what it is that's actually stressing you out. And we'll call that thing the stressor. What is your stressor? Get it out of your head, write it down, say it to a friend, whatever you need to do, get clarity around it. Because when we're stressed, we often feel like the whole world is falling apart and everything sucks and suddenly it's this huge problem. But really, if we drill down, it's probably one thing, or it could be a few things, but it's probably a specific thing that could be solved. The next thing that you want to do is write down 3 actions you can take to get the resources you need to overcome this challenge. Focus on what's in your control, because we spend a lot of time focusing on things that we actually can't do anything about. So think about what's in my control. What can I do about this right now? So take stock of your resources. Who can you ask for help? Where can you find the information you need? Write that down. So let's say that your stressor is, I've got a chemistry test coming up on Friday and I just did the practice test and I dismally failed. So now I'm really worried that I'm going to fail the real test. So you might write down on your list of things that you can do. Number 1, I'm going to go talk to my chemistry teacher ASAP and get a little bit more help, see if they can talk me through some of the concepts I don't understand. Number 2, I'm going to attempt another practice test. And number 3, I'm going to talk to some friends in my class as well, because they might be able to help me out. And they also might be able to calm me down a little bit, which will help me focus. So these are really simple things, but they make a big difference. And if you can cross each of these things off, that's going to be a reinforcer to you that, hey, I actually can get this done and things are going to be okay. And just a quick plug, Emily Purcell did a really great check-in and chat last week about stress and anxiety. And if you want to learn more about it and how that actually works in your brain, definitely go and watch that one. That was from last Thursday.
Excellent. And you can find that at www.visionaustralia.org/check-in and chat. And it will be up there for you to watch again if you missed that one. What about, are there relaxation techniques and things like that that we can do to help manage stress as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So Emily talked about a lot of these as well, which was really great. One of them is obviously mindfulness or meditation. And I will recommend the Headspace app or website for those. So Headspace has a collection of mindfulness videos that you can listen to and follow along with. And basically they talk you through some breathing exercises or some visualization exercises that can really help calm you down. And that's especially useful if you're so stressed that you're not even at a point where you can actually write down what the stressor is yet and write down your checklist. You might want to do some mindfulness first to just calm down so that you can move on to that next task.
Yeah, and the Headspace app is quite accessible as well for those of us who might be using it on an iPhone or an iPad with VoiceOver. And they break things down into the nice little cartoon kind of concepts as well, which I quite like. It's some of it's quite, there's some really cool visualizations in there that can be really good. Yeah, we hear a lot of information at the moment about the importance of sleep, and we touched on this at the beginning as well. Why is sleep so crucial, and how does it make a difference to our study habits?
Yeah, so what people definitely know about sleep is that it's a time for your body to rest and recover, right? But what maybe some people don't think about is that it's also a time for your mind to do the same thing, to rest, recover, to consolidate all the learning that you made that day, and to even regulate your mood. So getting the right amount of sleep is really important. Just to give a quick breakdown, when we sleep in cycles, and each cycle lasts about 90 minutes. And in one cycle, there are 4 sleep stages. So there's light sleep, intermediate sleep, deep sleep, and what we call rapid eye movement sleep. Deep sleep is when your body is recovering, so your muscles and your bones are getting the rest they need to be ready for the next day. Rapid eye movement sleep, or REM sleep, is when your mind is doing all those things I just described. So storing all the memories that you made that day, regulating your mood and consolidating your learning. It's also the time when you're having really crazy, vivid dreams. So you're very close to wakefulness at this point in time, and you could be woken very easily and probably remember your dreams if you woke up during this stage. Now, the key thing to note is that the amount or the duration of the REM sleep, when you're getting that consolidation of learning, that duration increases with each cycle. So in your first 90-minute cycle of sleep, you might only get like 10 minutes of REM. But towards the last few cycles in, let's say, an 8-hour sleep, by the time you get to the 8th hour, your REM could be maybe half an hour long or maybe even longer. So it's actually really important to get multiple consecutive cycles of sleep to increase the amount of REM you get. If you don't get enough REM, you'll find that you wake up and you don't feel well rested. You still feel really groggy, your brain's not working properly. In fact, if you've had 5 hours of sleep or less, your brain will be operating at the same capacity of someone who is intoxicated with alcohol. So really, your problem-solving ability isn't going to be great, and you're certainly not going to have much luck trying to learn new things. Additionally, like we said, if you don't get enough REM, you're not going to store the memories you made that day. So you could have spent all night studying for an exam. You pulled an all-nighter, but the next day, are you going to remember everything that you learned? Possibly not, because REM is so important. In terms of making sure we get more REM and better sleep in general, I have a few quick tips. Make sure you've got a regular bedtime and wake up time, and make sure that you've got some quiet time before your bedtime to really calm yourself down. And what that includes is avoiding screens. If you have some sight and you can see blue light, which is emitted on your screens, you'll find that blue light actually suppresses the hormone melatonin, which is what tells you to feel sleepy. So it's sometimes really hard to get to sleep if we've been staring at screens late at night. So to avoid that blue light, either just don't use any screens, or you can get a blue light filter for your device. I'd also say avoid caffeine late in the day. Generally, I'd advise not having it after 2 p.m. It's probably 2 p.m. is the last time you should have any caffeine in your system. And aim for about 8 hours a night of sleep. Younger people tend to need a little bit more and older people a little bit less, but 8 is around average.
Excellent. We've covered heaps today and it's been great. Just as a final quick wrap up, I guess, it often feels like we're supposed to be prioritizing so many aspects of our lives: sleep, study, hobbies, time with family and friends. Do you have any final tips you want to give on how we can aim for a good balance between all of those things?
Yeah, that's such a good point, Caitlin. And I think really it comes back to that routine, doesn't it? I think if you can get your routine right, you'll find that so many other things fall into place. Mental health is better. You've found a balance because you've scheduled everything in, the fun as well as the study. And if you're getting good sleep as well, that's going to enhance your learning, enhance your productivity, and enhance your mental health as well. So I think if you had to take one thing from today's webinar, it's got to be get that routine right and make sure it's got the balance of everything you need in there, and don't give up on it because it is hard to stick to, but stick to it and make those adjustments that you need to make along the way until you feel like it's working for you.
Fantastic. We need to wrap up around about now, but I'd just like to thank everybody very much for attending the session. Just to let you know, the recording will be made available a few days afterwards if you go to the check-in and chat page. So visionaustralia.org/check-in and chat, you'll be able to find it there. Melly, thanks so much for sharing all your expertise. I think we've all learned a heap, even those of us who aren't studying currently. There's some general great life tips there, which is fantastic. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Just a reminder that Vision Australia is offering services via telehealth at the moment if you're still spending a lot of time at home. So that can be conducted through phone, video conferencing, email, video conferencing, or a combination of those technologies. If you need help to get set up for telehealth, you can contact our AT help desk. So you can do that by calling 1300 847 466. And you can also call that number to find out what services we have available. If email is your preference, you can email info@visionaustralia.org. Before we finish up, I'd also like to invite you to join us on Tuesday for the next check-in and chat webinar. It starts at 11 a.m. in the eastern states, 10:30 in South Australia and the Northern Territory, and 9 a.m. in Perth. We'll be speaking with Vision Australia's Assistive Technology Advisor, David Woodbridge, about coding and gaming. So that should be a great one. Look forward to that. Hope you can join us then. But in the meantime, enjoy the rest of your Thursday, everyone, and we'll see you again soon.